Welcome in to the B-Sides of Sports. This is our Season 3, Episode 13, and in this one, Drake and I are going to start off covering the Super Wildcard Weekend that just happened this past weekend. So a lot of really good games here, and a lot of really unexpected outcomes, I think, for the general public and just the viewership at large. So Drake and I wanted to start with the Ryans, who visited the Detroit Lions this past weekend. Lions took this one away. Very close game, just 24-23 over the Rams. Where do you want to start with this one, Drake?
I think for my first biggest takeaway from this game was, I think the Rams overachieved this year. I didn't have them being a terrible team this year, but again, I think a 10-7 season after the disaster that was last season with all the injuries, I think is a good season, as well as finding players like Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams really stepping up. And now obviously they never have their first round picks, but again, for the Rams, that's not what it's about. They consistently hit on these late round gems. So I just think if you're the Rams right now, your main takeaway is, look, going into next year, we can just rebolster and be a true contender just a few years removed from our Super Bowl. And if you're the Lions, again, I think this game was not very convincing, in my opinion, of a team that's going to win the Super Bowl this year or even another playoff game. I would have liked to just see a little more out of all of them. Jahmyr Gibbs wasn't necessarily as explosive as we've seen him be. Jameson Williams, same thing goes with him. So a lot of their X factors just did not really show up. Obviously, Josh Reynolds had a great game, but I think that might have just been, coming from the Rams. He had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, but Amon-Ra played well, you expect. David Montgomery, Jared Goff played consistent. You expect all of those things. So on offense, though, I just don't think if you're playing these other top-tier teams in the NFC with just so many weapons who can step up on any given night, like the Packers, as they showed this week, I just think, I don't know, I think you're going to need a little bit more of an X factor, because as we've seen in this playoff for some reason, unlike the regular season, this has been a very offensive heavy playoffs. Considering we had a downtick on overall offense this year, it's surprising that the playoffs have been so explosive. That being said, though, the Lions offense was not very explosive. Their longest play was only 33 yards from the line of scrimmage, and I'm just not very keen on that. So, congrats, Lion. You got your playoff win, for the first time in 31 years. You broke the streak, but again, this take might age like spoiled milk, but I just don't see them making it that much further in the playoffs.
Yeah, to piggy off just quickly your point about the Rams, I think their ability to draft well in the later rounds of the draft super important. In the past, we've talked about how they were willing to kind of mortgage the future to go all in, and I think when you can have a Super Bowl ring to show for it, it often becomes worth it in the short term, but I think the long term starts to become a concern. And I think this Rams roster, as presently constructed, has done well. Obviously, Nacua and Kyron Williams both being fifth round draft picks, really, really well done by that front office. And the game itself, this was really a game of two halves for me. Obviously, the first half started off with just a bunch of consecutive scoring drives, and we saw some of that offense dry up for both teams in the second half. Not sure if that's players getting tight, defenses adjusting to kind of the offensive schemes that were being run. To the Rams, I think they really struggled in the red zone on this one, going 0 for 3. All of those touchdown drives early on in the game were kind of big plays that kind of were run in for touchdowns. In the second half, one of the things that kind of stuck out to me that I really didn't love on the Rams side was McVay's usage of the timeouts. Personally, to me, I think, taking the 5-yard penalty for the delay of game is worth it in the grand scheme of the game. And we kind of saw it down the stretch. The Rams could have really used those timeouts to stop the clock when the Lions were able to just take away kind of the game there at the end. And with the Lions, I'm with you. I think, there were some positives. Obviously, Aiden Hutchinson had a better showing. He kind of has come on late at the end of the season. He had 2 sacks, 4 quarterback hits. But I think, the offense unable to generate points at the end, there was a little bit concerning. And there are a couple of things that paid off, but at the same time, I think Dan Campbell's aggressiveness might come back to bite them at certain points. And I think, with it, you need to accept both the good and the bad, right? Of that ultra aggressive green light go and, super egregious fourth downs, and even that throwing on 2nd and 9 at the end of the game, right? Obviously it worked out, but I think in a situation where you're trying to run the clock, that could have kind of come back to bite them if the Rams had been able to get back the ball. We saw that just the drive before, they were able to get down all the way into field goal range before the penalty took them out of it. So again, I really love Dan Campbell, right? I think just the attitude and kind of the gust and the confidence he's put into this team and kind of really turned the direction of the franchise around has been incredible. At the same time, I think the X's and O's continue to be a question for him, and obviously having Ben Johnson as your OC is a pretty good crutch to have. But yeah, I think I'm with you. I think they've had some really positive momentum, and getting that first elusive playoff win over 31 years is an accomplishment in and of its own right, but I don't really see them going on an extended postseason run here.
to build on that, it's like, to me, that win was too big of a deal to them. And again, I get it. It's 31 years, so you're naturally going to be very excited, but even the team seemed that way, right? Like, we gave Patrick Beverley so much crap when the Timberwolves won that playoff game, and the Timberwolves were celebrating when they made the playoffs. Like, that's kind of what this felt like to me, where to them, they've already achieved so much. I'm just scared that the inverse effect of that is going to be they show up unprepared next week. But obviously, we don't know. But a Bucks team that looked very dominant, we'll get into them a little bit later, going, against them, I just think that's going to be a hard matchup for them. And then to go back on the Rams, especially the red zone struggles, I get that Cooper Kupp is like amazing. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he almost had as many targets as Puka Nacua with half as many catches, but their red zone plan was so linearly, we are going to throw to Cooper Kupp in the end zone on some sort of double action route, right? Be it a zig or a slant or a fade that he just was cutting a little extra out on. So I just don't really understand why, you weren't trying to use guys like Demarcus Robinson has had some big weeks the last few weeks. Why aren't you trying to maybe get a play for him, right? They wouldn't expect it. Or Kyron Williams. That guy's pretty good. And I know he didn't have a great game necessarily against the Lions, but to me, the Rams, a lot of their issues in this game was their own shortcomings. And again, I think it's been an adjustment for McVay to kind of try to figure out how to get Cooper Kupp involved now with Puka because of the inconsistencies of Cooper being on the field or being at 100 this year. He's been banged up a lot this year, so I think he still wants to give him those touches because don't get me wrong, when healthy, Cooper Kupp is one of the best receivers in the league at getting separation, but I just think it provided a new wrinkle in their offense that they're now going to have an offseason to figure out.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch there. I had written down in my notes, I wanted to get your feel on the Cooper Kupp kind of lack of production we saw throughout this game and kind of just the inconsistent throughout the season. We're going to touch on the Lions a bit more in the next block. So just to focus on the Rams here for a minute, I think the red zone struggles were surprising to me, seeing how well Stafford had been dealing the ball. And I think you kind of just touched on it a bit there, just schematically wise. But if you could go just a little bit deeper, is there anything you thought that the Rams should have done differently in their utilization of Kupp in the red zone? Or do you think it was just too obvious to the Lions that they were just going to be targeting him and all? I mean, I think one of the drives, they threw it 3 times on 3rd and goal, or not. Maybe it wasn't 3rd and goal, but on 3 straight plays there down the stretch.
Well, so Cooper Kupp is one of the highest motion rates in the NFL, and that's for good reason. He's a great run blocker as well as being a pass catcher. So to me, I would have liked to see them use him as a run blocker, put him to one side of the formation. Okay, you guys like to throw to him in the red zone, then maybe run a counter play the other direction, right? That he's not blocking. So sure, he's a great blocker, but he's also a huge distraction. They were giving a lot of attention to him in the red zone, almost 2 guys on him each time. So to me, I would have liked to see some trickery around using him, right? So maybe you motion him to right to left, you see what coverage he's got, if it's man or zone. And then instead of doing a run to him, or maybe a draw or something, just something to, I don't know, kind of, get Cooper Kupp to make it look like that's who you're going to use, and then don't do it, do something else, because it just was so clear. Like you said, it was 3 times in one possession. So they made it just so abundantly clear what they were going to do. Any sort of trickery, which usually McVay's so good at. It's why when they had Todd Gurley and Jared Goff, their play action game was so successful, because Todd Gurley was just so good in the run game as well as a solid blocker. So even if he's just going to run, play action, he can set a great block for Jared Goff, as well as, again, that deception is what made them so good. So I was just kind of confused to see McVay not try a little more, I don't know, trickery in the red zone, especially after I think it was 6 red zone targets did not result in 1 catch. So
Yeah, it was interesting, and just especially when you consider that Nacua had been such a bright spot for them all game. 9 receptions, 181 yards, and a touchdown. It was just kind of puzzling to see them struggle, just kind of generating points in that red zone, and that's kind of where the game was flipped for the Lions. So with that, then I think we'll move on to kind of the second category of games we had over the weekend, and I pegged these kind of the unexpected blowouts. And, we call these unexpected. I also put in my notes, this was for the public, not for Drake, because Drake did a pretty good job sniffing some of these out. We're going to start with the Browns, who visited the Houston Texans, and this one got away from the Browns, particularly in that second half. A couple of untimely pick sixes by Joe Flacco really had the Texans up and running. So where do you want to start with this one, Drake?
So I think what people kind of took a little too much credence to was the fact that these teams had already played and the Browns won with a Davis Mills and Case Keenum combination. I think we put too much credence into that. I think on DraftKings, 80% of the money was on the Browns spread. And that's always a red flag because, again, they aren't going to give you a line that's that obvious. That's not how Vegas operates. But with that being said, I just think to me, what stuck out in this game, it wasn't even necessarily CJ Stroud, but it was the Texans from front to back just looked like the better team through and through. Don't get me wrong, CJ's a big part of that, but Joe Flacco, as I kind of had been talking about, as great as he'd been playing, he'd been throwing a lot of interceptions, and at some point, he wasn't going to be the superstar that he'd been playing like. It's inevitable. As awesome as his run was, and as fun as this will be to remember the sort of twilight of his career, having one last good run, at no point was he ever going to outplay a young CJ Stroud, on a Texans team that, again, would have probably won earlier in the season, too, if CJ was there. Because here's what I'm going to say. So, as controversial as the take of this is, I feel like the Browns have gotten so much credit for playing through their injuries, and that's right, they have. But at the same time, so many of the games they've won, they have not played like the better team, in my opinion. They've just, again, kind of had things to go in their way. The Colts game is one that I look at. The Colts, in my opinion, were another team that overachieved by a lot. We were playing way above our talent level, especially at quarterback. Same were the Browns. In that Colts games, to me, the Browns were the worst team like 80% of the game, and then they had some late resurgence that won it for them. And then watching the Texans beat the Colts and we struggled to beat them, I just knew if the Browns needed a miracle to beat us, then there's no way they're going to beat a healthy Texans team, because the Texans are like 15% further along in their rebuild than the Colts are. So to me, it just looked like when I was looking at this, I was like, if they needed everything in the world to go right to beat the Colts, you aren't going to beat the Texans like that. And guess what? It didn't. 2 terrible pick sixes by Joe Flacco, as well as a consistent Nico Collins, CJ Stroud connection. See, Nico Collins has been a receiver I've been huge on since he entered the league. Whenever I'm playing Madden, I always trade for him to get on my teams because he's just so big and fast. He's a mismatch, and he's kind of that new age receiver that everyone loves, the DK Metcalf, the AJ Brown. So I knew as soon as he got a quarterback, he could finally step into that. But I just thought, I'm not going to say I predicted the season he'd have this year, but I knew that he definitely had a ceiling as a number one receiver. And I think CJ and that O-line have really helped to shore that up.
Yeah, I think Stefanski's quote was a really good one. He said after the game, "We picked a bad day to have a bad day. That's all of us. That's players, coaches, offense, defense, special teams, not good enough." And to me, that really kind of summarized this Cleveland Browns performance. They really just got thoroughly outplayed by the Texans, like you kind of went over there. And I really wanted to hone in on the Browns side, kind of that defense, right? Throughout the regular season, it kind of earned the title as the number one defense in the NFL. And to me, I thought just the eye test kind of went against that to some degree. You mentioned that Colts game, but I thought the Browns found themselves in more shootouts than they would have liked to be in, having what many proclaim to be that number one defense. They gave up 286 yards and 24 points in the first half. That was their most all season. And I think the concern for me was like watching it play out. It didn't feel like an anomaly performance by the Texans, right? That, Cleveland monstrous pass rush. It's been, people have talked about all year, obviously Myles Garrett. They only had 1 quarterback hurry and 0 sacks against Stroud all game. And then kind of looking at that secondary, playing that single high coverage, they kind of just got burned over and over. And Stroud, obviously we know the numbers. He torched them, over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, I thought it was just a little puzzling that, that number one defense, I think like just the eye test would have told me that someone like the Ravens or even the Chiefs have had a better defense throughout the year. And so I think, I wouldn't have necessarily predicted a blowout, but I didn't necessarily understand kind of the hype going into this game, particularly with the Browns having to just cycle through so many quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I've kind of been not huge on the Browns all year, just mainly because of they are what the Cowboys were on offense, where their stats were hyperinflated because of a few games that they won in dominant fashion. They won 24-3 against Cincinnati, 27-3 against Tennessee, 27-0 against Arizona. So there's a lot of games like that where they would blanket inferior opponent, and so it just kind of hike up their numbers as a whole, as well as they didn't play a ton of prevent defense this year. So, those late game stats didn't get padded a ton. As well as, though, again, going back to what you said about the Texans outplaying them, to me, though, Laramie Tunsil, one of the best tackles in football that we never talk about, and now the Texans have really come into this 2 tight end formation with Brevin Jordan and Dalton Schultz. So now they have a little bit more flexibility. And also with all the wide receiver injuries, they've been a little more keen on doing that, as well as using the fullback Andrew Beck. So to me, this was a team who knew the D-line was good. So they're like, look, we're going to challenge you, and we are going to block all of the guys that we can. A lot of those play action shots that CJ would take, they would have extra protection, and they picked up blitz as well. Again, just one team looked way way better coached than the other, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we're going to touch on Cedre and kind of just the Texans and their rebuild a lot more later on in the show, so we can save a lot of that discussion for that. But the last thing I kind of want to touch on the game specifically is just kind of the irony of this matchup, right? Obviously, a couple of years ago, that blockbuster trade, and it's no secret that you and I aren't big fans of Deshaun Watson, but I think just kind of the trickle-down effect of that trade continues to just kind of show how the Texans have outdealed really the Browns in so many different ways. They obviously got the linebacker Harris as their third round pick in 2022. Obviously Will Anderson, and then Tank Dell was one of those picks too. So they really just continue to develop their players well, and they're really showing that they kind of fleece the Browns in this trade, particularly if Watson's not going to be able to stay on the field and contribute at all to the Browns. So I'm super happy for the Texans. I think it's well deserved, and again, we'll touch on it a bit more later.
Then just my last thing. And again, another thing, they screwed Baker Mayfield. Then look how Baker played on Sunday. Or on Monday, excuse me. So again, would they have won if they would have just kept Baker? Who knows? I mean, no one does. Obviously, it's just a game of ifs. But again, Cleveland, once again, poor roster management and ownership decisions has once again cursed them to another however many years of mediocrity.
Yeah, I was having the same thoughts watching Baker torch that Eagles secondary. So we'll move on to the second game, kind of in this unexpected blowouts category. And, if you watched the last episode, you would have seen that Drake saw this one coming. The Packers and the Dallas Cowboys squared off, and the Packers took this one away running 48-24. And, a lot of different things you could take away from this one. But Drake, where do you want to start with your celebration of this game you called?
Well, it's just like I said, how I compared them to the Pacers in the NBA, how they beat the Bucks in all 4 games this season. The Packers just showed once again why they are one of the most young, fun teams in football. Romeo Doubs had a great game, who hasn't had a 100-yard game, and I think it was over 6 weeks. So he's only had 3 all season, so not a huge guy. Luke Musgrave came back, has a touchdown in his debut. They didn't even have to use Jaden Reed, who's one of my favorite rookie receivers and one of my favorite young receivers in the league. Bo Melton had 100 yards last week, only had 1 catch for 7 yards. Because guess what? Other people were getting open, so they got the ball to them. With all these young players and no defined number one, it almost helps them, I think, in terms of where they have this they kind of have mastered the rotation that the Chiefs were trying to find, because unlike the Chiefs' insane wide receiver rotation, those were a lot more of veteran players who you kind of knew what they were already and how they were and what they liked. And so I think they had issues with that because they couldn't get them all what they liked, as well as just overall issues with drops, while Green Bay's been the opposite. So, and then I look at a guy like Keyshawn Nixon, a young corner for them, had 11 tackles in this game. Jair Alexander, their young lockdown corner, had an interception as well as a really good game. Just through and through, it was the young bucks for the Packers came through. And I saw some takes this week essentially saying that Aaron Rodgers was holding back LaFleur's offense. And I don't think that's a good take. And I think that's a little silly to say right now with only 1 year under our belt. And again, they got a lot of picks for trading Rodgers, and a lot of these players have come from that. So I don't think it was Rodgers holding it back as much as the Rodgers trade has helped kind of evolve this team. So once again, Aaron Rodgers is helping the Green Bay Packers by setting up their future with a trade and taking on a large responsibility for his contract, so they can have a lot of these young players and have guys like Aaron Jones and Preston Smith's contracts.
Yeah, this was a really fun one. And what I have loved all season about the Green Bay Packers, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but I've loved seeing the confidence that LaFleur has put in the young players. They obviously let Jordan Love rip the ball from day one. And we saw first half of the season, he really, really looked like just not a starting caliber NFL quarterback, but they stuck with him and he came alive the second half of the season. Over the last 8 or 9 games, it's a 21-1 touchdown to interception ratio. Just an incredible feat for a guy that doesn't always make the best decisions. And we kind of saw him mature throughout the season, which was just a really cool and inspiring thing to see. On the Cowboys side of things, I think this was just an all-out collapse. Dak obviously had a horrific performance. I think the numbers said that a lot, which is kind of some of the filler numbers they were able to put in that second half when the game was completely out of reach. Micah Parsons felt like he had little to no impact on the game. And Mike McCarthy, I think, for all of these 12-win regular seasons, just continues to have some suspect coaching decisions in the playoffs. There's one thing that stuck out to me. I think there's always a stat can tell a story sometimes that's bigger than what we just see. And the one thing that stuck out to me was Next Gen Stats reported that Luke Musgrave was the most open any player in the NFL has been all season long, on that catch he had that he ran in for the touchdown. And, to me, just, one mistake that can kind of capture, it's like a picture says 1,000 words, right? That mistake kind of just capitalized how that Cowboys defense was really falling apart schematically. They just did not look ready, prepared at all for what the Green Bay offense was going to do. And, I don't necessarily feel, I think, there are a lot of people out there really hate the Cowboys. A lot of people really love them. I don't really feel strongly one way or the other, but it is just interesting as a younger NFL fan, seeing kind of just the legend of the Cowboys continue to grow in a year where so many people expected them to make it to the Super Bowl. And that's been the conversation around them all year, to not even make it out of the first round, maybe the first number 2 seed to lose to the 7th seed. Just an incredible and something we haven't seen before collapse.
Yeah, and I think, again, though, what stuck out to me, again, I don't think it's coaching or even personnel that's really hurting the Cowboys. I just think it's culture. This is a team who, the second they start winning, we talk about how they're the best team in the league. The second they start losing, they're immediately the worst team in the league. I think they're so polarized right now. And again, part of that is because of how that team is run. And that's, to me, where I think the biggest glaring issue is. Jerry Jones wanting to have his hand in the cookie jar for this team, I think, is hurting them. I just am not a fan of owner-led teams where, the owner has a large say in what the teams do. Colts Jim Irsay hires someone to essentially inform his decisions, and then he'll sign the check, but he has someone under him who does all of the research that a billionaire is not going to do, because he's a billionaire. Why would he even ever do anything at that point? So I think that's kind of the way to do it. Look at Tepper and the Carolina Panthers right now. He's had his hand in the cookie jar so much, and it's ruining that team. The Cowboys culture has been losing for the last 20 years. And I don't care if anyone says, oh, well, they keep making the playoffs. They do, because they're great at finding talent. They're great at getting good head coaches, but they can't make the next level because of organizational failure. Look at the Browns. The Browns suck. It's not because I don't think the 37,000 QBs they've fielded over the last 10 years are bad. It's, again, it falls back on management. Look at Baker Mayfield. He looks happier and he's playing better than ever before the second he was away from the Browns. And same thing with Jason Garrett. He looks great on TV. He's having fun. But while he was with the Cowboys, it just never felt like, it kind of feels like these coaches have to be reserved with Jerry Jones. I don't feel like, could you see them hiring a guy like Dan Campbell? Because I couldn't. That's a guy who's going to come in there and change things, and he's going to want things done his way. I don't think Jerry Jones is ever going to let a coach do that, and I think that's going to hold the Cowboys back until Jerry can swallow his pride and realize that he just kind of doesn't know what's best for his team.
I love your point about the culture, and I think sometimes a lot of like real football people, right, want to say that like culture is a little bit overrated at times, but I really don't believe that to be the case. And I think it can be as simple as, this is a Cowboys team that hasn't made it to the NFC title game over the last 25 years, yet all we hear them talk about is the Super Bowl, right? And I think there's something to be said about, you haven't even accomplished the step before the end goal. How are you so focused on the end goal? And I think it's directly correlated to why they became the first number 2 seed to lose to the 7th seed. I think those are all things that tie together, because again, it's rooted in the culture of, you're missing the baby steps you need to take in order to take the giant step towards reaching that end goal. And I think everything you outlined there is dead on.
Yeah, no. And with that, then we'll go into the last of the unexpected games. But to me, this was, I think, the easiest game to telegraph. If I only was going to bet on one team of a non kind of not 1, 2, or 3, with any 2 or 3 seed not winning, any of the later games in terms of, sort of an upset by the Bucs. Obviously the Bucs were a higher seed, but they were not favored. This would have been the game for me, just because looking at it on paper, it was an Eagles team that seemingly was just kind of lost. They lost everything they knew, all of that culture that they once had, the identity that they once had, everything. And Jalen Hurts, I think, was pressured. I couldn't find the number, but if you watch that game, you would have realized with one of the best O-lines in football, there shouldn't be free rushers on your quarterback who you're paying $50 million to. You want your $50 million quarterback to do $50 million things, so you better keep him protected. And my God, they just could not pick up a blitz all game. DeAndre Swift once again looked mediocre. Devonta Smith looked awesome. So again, there are bright spots on this team, but to me, it's just crazy how such a good team looked so bad. I think there are 5 5 or 6 teams that didn't make the playoffs who would have played this game so much closer, if not won, against the Buccaneers. But not to besmirch what the Buccaneers did, but holy crap, it seemed like they dropped the ball 17 times in this game. And if it wasn't for a lot of broken tackles and great plays by the receivers, this game could have been a lot closer than it was, because my goodness, the Bucs had a drops problem. They had 5 drops in this game alone. You flip that and Baker Mayfield would have only missed 7 passes all game on almost 40 attempts. So, I mean, really just flip the game. So without all these huge plays, 44 yard touchdown, 56-yard touchdown, 23-yard touchdown, without all those big plays, you take those away and it could have been a really different game. So my hat's off to the Buccaneers, because I think even with lackluster coaching and $80 million in dead cap, to have won a playoff game, that's a fantastic feat as a team. So they have nothing but proud that they can be of themselves.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Jalen Hurts' average time to pressure against him was just 2.0 seconds, which is the shortest amount of time it's been over the last 2 years. So just kind of speaking to kind of the puzzling O-line concerns that they had throughout this game. I think I just had 2 main takeaways from this one. The first being, I think that Philadelphia secondary has been torturable over the last 2 years, honestly. I think looking back at their schedule last year, every time they faced an above average quarterback, whether it was Kirk Cousins, Dak Prescott, that defense was getting lit up for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. And not coincidentally, Baker had over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in this one. I think that was the concern for me all year going into this game. And I think kind of just seeing the spirit of the team was broken, right? Losing, I think, 6 of the last 7, really just look at all like the Eagles we had known. I think, again, just looking at one play that kind of just captures the game at large. The Eagles had the penalty, right? That on the extra point put them at the goal line at the 1, and obviously they went for the tush push. And for the first time that I can remember that it wasn't a penalty related, they weren't able to get it in. And I think that kind of just spoke to the spirit of the team. Really felt a little bit broken to me. You could just see it in the body language. There's a lot of finger pointing in that Eagles secondary. And even just the way Jalen Hurts was carrying himself, right? He's been so great at the podium throughout his career. And you could just kind of hear it in his voice, right? There was just a level of defeat that we haven't seen out of this Eagles team before. And that was just a little sad for me. I think the other bit of news coming out of this one is it sounds like Jason Kelce is going to be retiring. So I just wanted to say hats off to him. Obviously one of the most incredible careers we've seen out of a center. I just love listening to him speak, whether it's at the podium or listening to his podcast. So really just a sad ending for this Eagles season. And I didn't really foresee it coming.
Yeah, no, me either. And just to touch on Jason Kelce real quick, he is the best center in football, one of my favorite players in the league. So I do really just want to emphasize that, like, what a career, most all pros ever by a center, and most Pro Bowls. I mean, just he will go down as one of the greatest at his position, just like his brother. So hats off to him. And my last thing I want to touch on is Nick Sirianni just having no clue what he's doing. I think is not more apparent than with the Fletcher Cox scenario. I'm not sure how much you guys and everyone keeps up with snap counts, but snap counts to me are something that I pay a lot of attention to, because to me, one, I do it because I bet on sports. So I like to see how often the player is playing, but 2, you can really learn a lot about a team. And the fact that Jalen Carter is still not consistently playing over 47% of snaps a game, while Fletcher Cox is consistently playing over 60, is mind-boggling to me. You were killing Baker Mayfield that game with not the best player in. I'm sorry, Fletcher Cox might be the veteran on that team, but he is no longer the best interior defender. You can make an argument that Jordan Davis is playing better right now. So personnel is bad. And then again, I'm looking at a guy like Nolan Smith, a guy that you were so confident on and drafted, and he's only playing 22% of snaps despite having one of your best pass rush win rates. It's just, this team is so confusing to me. It's so frustrating. And I will not understand how Sirianni just has wholeheartedly lost his team. And essentially every time he's had to call the plays, this team's looked terrible. That even that year they won the Super Bowl, they did not look good the first few weeks until Steichen took over, and then Steichen leaves, and now they suck again. It's just, again, they don't suck again. They won 11-6, but you get what I'm saying? He's just obviously lost his team, and it's just mind-boggling to me. I don't know if I've ever seen a team collapse so fast.
Yeah, especially just given that it was kind of on the back of the head coach seeing that collapse happen. It was just odd all around. With that, then we'll move to the last 2 games of this wild card weekend, that being the Pittsburgh Steelers, who visited the Buffalo Bills, and the Miami Dolphins that visited the Chiefs. I think both of these ended up being blowouts, although the Steelers one might have felt a little close for comfort for the Bills later on in that game. Major takeaways from either of these, Drake?
I got 2 for each. One, I'm going to kind of still hold up on, I think you can win with Tua, but I just think once again, we're seeing that he's a fair weather quarterback, and Miami and the Dolphins against bad teams, he's great. Once teams know what he likes to do, that's where the issue falls. And I know a lot of people were trashing McDaniel for the play calling, but with to his arm, look at all of the bad balls he threw, that half of them were sailing because he doesn't have the arm strength that we see in guys like Mahomes around. And even Mahomes barely had over 50% completion at home at Arrowhead. So it was a hard game to play in. And Tua once again has just shown that he's not built for these hard games. And then with the Bills, it's so sad to me because I think this is the best the Bills team has been playing in so long, and it's the most injured they've been in so long. Rasul Douglas was out this game. They had someone else went down with injury this game. To me, it just feels like the Bills, as great as this run has been, I think the injuries at some point are going to catch up with them. It might not be the next round or the round after, but they're really going to have to next man up the crap out of the next few games if they want to be in this, because for as inspired as this team is playing, it's just a shame how the injury bug has really bit them in the butt.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of really good points there. The play calling that you mentioned was the most suspect thing to me, and I think it really just speaks to kind of the reality of having Tua as your quarterback, right? And again, I don't mean this to sound as an indictment, but the truth is, like, McDaniels really didn't trust Tua at all to throw the deep ball at all in that game, whether it was the weather conditions or whether it was just thinking that Tua was going to make a mistake on the read. Even when they were down majorly, right, we just continuously saw Tua throwing the ball behind the line of scrimmage, hoping that one of those, pass catchers was able to make a play. And we saw that, I think, just that Chiefs secondary, and especially Snead and McDuffie, just held up really, really well against Tyreek, and just no explosive plays, right? The one play was almost a bad throw by Tua on the play that they're able to get the touchdown. So I thought you did a really good job kind of capturing that one. On the Bills-Steelers side of things, I just wanted to touch on the Steelers real quickly. Just a lot of bad mistakes, right, by a team that's pretty disciplined usually in the Steelers. The Pickens fumble, the Pat should have been fumble. The defense just looked a little bit more unorganized than I was expecting. And over the last 5 playoff games for the Steelers now, they're giving up an average of 40 points a game. Just not a stat you like to see. And so, I think Tomlin's seat is probably safe. I think in this kind of modern day NFL head coaching seats are hotter than they've ever been. But as of today, he made a commitment, said he's going to be willing to be back. And, I think the Steelers are kind of just in that middle ground right now. They don't really have a difference maker at quarterback. And they always have a defense that's above average, but not necessarily one of the top 5 units in the league. And I think it's just kind of a recipe that puts you in the middle every year.
Well, and here's one thing I want to say. I saw some Steelers fans today defending Tomlin and this 0-5 record in the last few playoffs, essentially saying, oh, well, he hasn't had too much talent to work with, so he's overachieved. He's picking out all that talent. I mean, how do you make an excuse for the guy when he's the one saying this is who I want? To me, I just don't have. It's the same reason why I do kind of agree with the mutual parting of ways of New England. Bill Belichick was struggling. He couldn't nail the quarterback, and in the NFL, it's such a turnaround league. And I think Mac Jones might have worked, but I just think Belichick had such an identity. I think it was hard for him to break that on the Patriots. Same thing with Tomlin. I think he's looking for a certain type of way to win with, a very hard-nosed defense and an offense that just doesn't lose you the game. And I just don't think that's a winning recipe anymore in the NFL.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point.
And with that, we will go to a close. And with our next segment now, we will preview Divisional Weekend and all the matchups that come with it. Welcome back into the B-Sides of Sports. And for our last segment today, being a special playoff episode, we are only just going to be talking playoffs. That's it. So we will be cutting the C block for today. As I just said, we will be previewing Divisional Weekend. But before that, I just want to give a shout out to my friend Landon. He got me this Austin Eckler jersey. And if you know, I do not like the Chargers or Austin Eckler. That is because I have lost to Austin Eckler now the last 9 times I've played him in fantasy football, even if he didn't have a good game. So we did jersey exchange, so I thought it'd be funny. So just wanted to shout him out. But then going into the meat and potatoes for the day, a lot of really good matchups, I think, this week. I think we'll start with the 1 seeds, obviously, coming off their rest and being obviously the 2 pretty much unanimous favorites to win it all. Wilson, let's start with Texans-Ravens. What are you looking at going into this matchup this week?
Yeah, I'm going to say the same thing for the Ravens that I'll say for the Niners in a couple of minutes. And I think the question for the 1 seeds becomes, how long does it take for the rust of having that much rest seep into the game, and how much, does it affect, how much time does it take them to get back into their rhythm? Obviously, the Ravens and the Niners both had pretty strong closes to their seasons. And I think it just becomes a question that once you're away from game speed it's going to be 21 days for both of those teams, given that they're able to kind of give themselves a bye in week 18. will the Texans and in the next game, will the Packers be able to kind of capitalize on coming off of really good games for both of them? Obviously, blowout wins, offense and defenses both rolling for those teams. In this matchup specifically, obviously these rosters played at the beginning of the season and the Ravens were able to take it away pretty handily. Obviously, the counter will be that the Texans have obviously gotten a lot better, a lot more experience for a rather young roster, particularly on the offensive side. And I think the counterpoint to that would be that the Ravens have also gotten better, right? I think Lamar really answered a lot of questions as a passer and just his ability to kind of control that offense. And just schematically, what I'm looking at here is I think, and one thing that I hadn't thought about before, but I was thinking about it a bit over this weekend, is I think Lamar's ability to run the ball really opens up the Ravens running backs' ability to run the ball. And that's just an interesting thing I hadn't thought about before, even though it could be rather obvious. You just looking at the number of running backs, right, that have been RB1 caliber for the Ravens this year: Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, J.K. Dobbins, and even Keaton Mitchell. Obviously a lot of injuries on that list. But I just think that Ravens offense was the question for me going into this season, and they've answered a lot of them, a lot of dominant showings, right? They had blowouts against the Jags, the Niners, the Dolphins. So, really, really excited to see how the Ravens come out looking. And as for a pick, I think I'd have to go with the Ravens as much as I love the positive momentum of the Texans. I think this is the game that Lamar finally answers some questions about his ability to play in the postseason.
Yeah, and so being a Peyton Manning guy, I understand that it can take some time to really figure out the playoffs, but also being an Andrew Luck guy, I understand that for some people it doesn't. Some people go into it and they start winning right away. They start making it right away. So I see both sides of it. But so your first point was literally, that was my main takeaway from this game, is both of these teams have changed almost like at least 50% of what they do from week one. So looking at the Texans, what stays consistent is CJ Stroud, being just the ball hucker that he is. They're throwing the ball 44 times in that first game, but he got sacked 5 times that week. Their O-line has really fixed a lot of the holes, and they've gotten a lot better at pass protection as the season's gone on. But again, the Ravens are one of the best defenses in the league, so I don't see too much changing there. Damian Pierce was their starting running back, getting most of the touches. Now it's Devin Singletary, so that provides a little bit new of a dynamic. Nico Collins was still almost the bona fide number one, getting the most targets and yards that game. Robert Woods had a way bigger part than he did now, and so did Tank Dell, who is out for the season, Noah Brown, who is out for the season. So again, that isn't great for them. But then you look at Baltimore, Lamar played terribly by his standards, 17 of 22 for 169 yards and an interception, no touchdowns with 4 sacks. Only rushed for 38 yards. Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, Justice Hill split the workload. None of them did good. So in what was one of the Ravens' worst games of the year, they won 25-10. So it's just kind of hard for me to see a world where the Texans do win this one. If they do, it'll be a shootout, and the Ravens defense has a lot of pitfalls. Another thing is, like you said, with Baltimore's offense, took them a while to get going. Getting Todd Monken, that's a very traditional passing offense. Lamar had never run one of those. So it was a lot of growing for him too. So just like CJ, Lamar did a lot of learning this year in his first, in my opinion, NFL style passing offense. So with the emergence of Odell and Rashad these last few weeks, as well as Isaiah Likely, with Mark Andrews maybe soon to follow, this offense is just really dangerous. And again, that is how the Texans will win. If this rest makes the Ravens struggle in the first half, the Texans are great at punishing. That's just kind of how their defense plays. Once they get up, they really sink their teeth into you. So I do have the Ravens in this one. I can see a world where the Texans win, but 9 times out of 10, I'm probably betting Ravens on this one. I always try to find a comparable matchup from the rest of the year, either if I'm betting on the game or doing research for the podcast. I don't really think we had a great example of that this year. So going forward with that, I think I just want to look at what both of these teams, do well and how that'll affect it. So, the Niners, I think being humbled by the Ravens in week 17 or 16 was actually good for them. Just kind of showed them, they are fallible and they need to play well. And like you said, we're going to kind of see how that rest factors in. We've never really seen the San Fran team be at that number 1 seed. So, I do think it'll be interesting with this lineup, to see how they handle that. But going over then to Green Bay, I just think the biggest thing is the Green Bay obviously is outmatched talent-wise, whereas all of their talent is young and fun. They just don't have nearly the pedigree that the 49ers do on offense. But the San Fran's biggest weakness is their secondary. As we all know, it's been picked on a lot. Travarius Ward, as great as he is at pass deflection, struggles to get turnovers. So you can, get big plays off on him occasionally. Hufanga is out for the year. So there's just a lot of holes in it. So we kind of know that's how teams have been able to beat them. Lamar had a masterclass against them. That's how they were able to beat them, right? So going on from that, if Jordan Love has a day he did like he did against the Cowboys, it's going to be a long day for San Fran. Now, again, they can go shot for them because they have the coaching where I don't think the Dallas Cowboys necessarily do, but Kyle Shanahan loves out coaching himself. And this feels like a trap game to me. I'm not going to take the Packers to win this one. I probably will still take a spread, maybe like a 12-point, 10-point spread, because I do think the Packers are going to keep this close. Their O-line played great yesterday against a fantastic front that is, Dallas's. So I think this match will be interesting. I have San Fran winning, but I honestly don't have too much to say about this game because it's kind of hard to match up these two teams, in my opinion, because we really haven't seen either of these teams play a team like the other. So I am really curious to see how this matchup's going to go on Sunday.
Yeah, not to be too square, but I'm going to pick the Niners here too. And, I think in the same sense that the matchup feels a little foreign to us because who would have foreseen the Green Bay Packers having the opportunity to play the 1 seed Niners? At the same time, I wonder if there's an element of that for the Niners too, right? I think, just looking on paper, I don't think many people would have picked the Packers to beat the Cowboys. And I think internally the Niners were probably thinking the same thing. So I wonder if there is a little bit of film adjustment that has to kind of undergo. I know teams don't normally do too much of that kind of predetermining kind of their matchup, but I just wonder, in this new world where we have that 7 seed, if any of that was happening. I think for the Niners, one of the things that I like about them going into this matchup is just we know that with the Niners, when Shanahan's script goes well, they usually win the game. And I think having this much time, this much rest, and just this much opportunity to kind of build a really strong game plan, I expect the Niners, even if they are a little bit rusty kind of on the field, I think schematically what they're going to be doing is going to be really well thought out. I think you make a good point about Shanahan out coaching himself. But I think at the same time, I think, if Shanahan's able to draw up the game plan exactly for Purdy, we always talk about those first 14, 16 plays coming into the game. If those go well, I don't really see a world where Green Bay is able to come from behind and take the game away from the Niners. I think, the world in which the Packers win this one is if they're able to kind of dig into that secondary, get a lead, and really force Brock Purdy to have to go out there and be the game changer as opposed to just the script and the weapons.
See, I disagree on that just from the standpoint of with this McCaffrey injury. I get that he was a full participant today, but that still isn't going to be enough for me because he is the X factor of this offense. He is, the engine that keeps this offense running. So to me, that is going to be the biggest thing. How does McCaffrey play on Sunday? Because I could see a world where, they get up big and kind of get complacent and maybe they are trying to give McCaffrey a little bit less, or he doesn't have that same burst so they can't hold on to a lead as well. And Green Bay is explosive. Their offense, that's kind of what they're known for. Jordan Love has had a lot of comebacks this year. So I could see this going either way for Green Bay winning it. But like you said, I think it's going to be, again, Packers are definitely fighting an uphill battle. I'm not trying to say I think the Packers are going to win this one. But what I think this game is going to show us that the 49ers are, mortal. Because I think for so long there, we just thought they were like unbeatable. And I still think that stigma kind of holds a little bit. And I just think once again, the Packers are just going to show us that's not true. Not necessarily with the win, but just again, with a really great game.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You and I see it a little bit differently because to me, the only reason I haven't put the Niners kind of in that unbeatable category is because of Brock Purdy. And it's kind of one of those situations where we've said it all year. He's never been able to bring them back from behind. And you can put a lot of that on the scheme and the coaching and the offense. But ultimately, right, you're looking for your quarterback to be a game elevator, right? A guy that can go out there and make plays when you really need them, crucial downs coming from behind. And I don't really think Brock Purdy is that guy. So when I kind of view, the lens of these Niners games and how they can go, I think that's always the way to get them, right? Get out to an early lead and enforce the weak point, right? If you would consider Brock Purdy to kind of be the weak spot on that roster. But yeah, I think it's an interesting kind of difference in opinion there.
Yeah, and that's just, again, my main takeaway is I just think, having watched Shanahan in the playoffs as long as I have now, there are just certain things that he doesn't do well in playoffs. And one of those is protecting leads. So as much as, on paper, like you said, fundamentally, it would make sense if you have to win with Brock Purdy throwing the ball more. But for Shanahan in the playoffs, I mean, he had Devonta Freeman averaging 7 yards a carry and blew a 28-3 lead. So it's not a talent issue. It's a coaching issue. We've seen that, right? Julio Jones, again, it's a coaching issue. So to me, this game is more on Shanahan, just like it just feels like a trap game through and through because this Packers team just played in another trap game and won. So I'm curious to see where the money's going to go for Vegas and how the line's going to shift as the week goes on. But Once again, I think the X factor in this game is going to be Kyle Shanahan. You know, what is he in the playoffs this year? Is he going to be the Kyle Shanahan we're used to, blowing leads and calling maybe the worst plays possible? I just think we're going to have to wait to see.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. So with that, then we'll move to what many are expecting to be the hottest game, right? One of the more rivalry games that we're getting in this kind of divisional round weekend. So that is the Kansas City Chiefs, who are going on the road for the first time in Patrick Mahomes' playoff career outside of a Super Bowl. Obviously, they're visiting the Buffalo Bills. And, to me, this is a kind of a crucial spot for both of these teams. Buffalo is obviously really rolling into this game. You mentioned earlier the injuries are a bit of a concern. And for the Chiefs, this has been somewhat of a down year for their offense. But with that, it's been the best defense of the Mahomes era Chiefs. So where are you kind of leaning in this one? Or what do you think the crucial X factors are going to be?
So I think I am once again gonna, as much as it pains me, I'm gonna lean Chiefs. But again, I'm leaning Chiefs. That doesn't mean I think they're gonna win. That's just who right now, at this moment, I'm leaning towards. Obviously, we're a week out. A lot can change in this week. But I think a lot of it comes down to how cold it is, how windy it is. Because as we saw in the Dolphins game, Mahomes didn't necessarily play too great. Rashee Rice played amazing. Travis Kelce played great. Pacheco, though, was the lifeblood of this offense. You can say whatever you want. If you watch this game, you understand that, to me, Pacheco really was the X factor. And in another cold weather game, I think that's when it's going to come down to. But I'm a little bit higher on the Bills' rush defense than the Dolphins. Dolphins is still a stout front, but I just think that team was morally not ready for this playoff run where the Bills have been there before, and they have a chip on their shoulder. This is the first time with the Chiefs coming to the Bills' house in the playoffs. So that's why then I kind of want to lean Bills. But at the same time, it's just so hard for me. Like, I really don't have anyone. I'm probably not going to bet this game outright because I just really could see this going as a blowout either way, as a close game either way, anything. This is a great rivalry, and that's what a great rivalry is. It's impossible to predict what's going to happen. So I think with this one, I'm not going to make a pick. I'm just going to say, I just hope we get a game on caliber and on par with what we have gotten historically with this franchise, with these two franchises.
Wow, I can't blame you. I'm not gonna lie. I really expected you to take the Bills in this spot. I think just for take consistency, I have to take the Chiefs in this spot, right? I've been, over the last 2 years, I've really faded the Bills a lot. I think their inconsistencies have really drawn me away from them. And in the same sense, I've really leaned on the pedigree of the Chiefs, just kind of believing in that trio of Kelce, Mahomes, and Reed on the offensive side. And to me, I think what the difference maker becomes on the Chiefs side is, I think, it's an odd thing because they're doing this in a different style of winning that we're not used to, right? Over this kind of mini dynasty, if you would call it, what we've really seen out of the Chiefs is really explosive offenses. Some could say some timely calls with some help from the referees, and kind of just getting into the shootout games, right? Where whether it's 41-35, 38-35, they're just finding ways to be the team that has the ball last and hope that Mahomes can go and get you some points. And this year, it's really not that addition to the Chiefs, right? We haven't seen very many game-winning drives from them at all because they have had consistently throughout this year a pretty elite defense. And I think on the flip side, what it's really resulted in is, even this is still an above-average offense. It's a rather conservative offense, and it's an offense that takes the points. Harrison Butker has been an absolute superstar for the Chiefs over, a lot of these games in this season. The Bengals game comes to mind, and even this Dolphins game, right? Just kicking field goal after field goal and just taking the points, not really taking many risks in the red zone, right? Mahomes obviously has been rather turnover prone in his career. It's gone kind of quietly, but it's not like he is, the most productive person with the ball. But I think this year in the red zone, what we're really seeing is because they have so much trust in that defense, they're willing to kind of just take three instead of, Mahomes trying to make something spectacular happen on 3rd and goal. And so I think, that is both a benefit and something that could take away. This is a game where, depending on the weather, could really come down to that Mahomes-Allen matchup. And I think what we've seen out of Allen is he's one of probably 2 or 3 guys in the league that can really go toe to toe with just making plays in the games paired up against Mahomes. That all being said, I think, the Bills, the injuries, I just think continue to be a concern for me. And even though they're going to be at home in this one, I'm going to lean on the pedigree of the Chiefs, and I'm going to take the Chiefs winning this one, as would be expected.
Yeah, to just for contrarian's sake, I'll take the Bills this week. So then next week we can have a little bit more discourse on it. And like I said, I see many realities in which they win, but this game is just really, weather I think has played a big factor in this playoff, and we've seen the two teams that have probably benefited from it the most right now. So they're both used to this, but one of them, I think the Bills had a better showing with more injuries than the Chiefs did, as well as against in my opinion, a Steelers team that played a lot more competently than the Dolphins did on Sunday.
And I think for the sake of the show, you have to take the Bills and I have to take the
Yeah.
Chiefs because
Yeah.
otherwise we're not staying true to our take. So with
It's
that
like, yeah,
then,
it's like principles. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So with that, then we'll move into the final matchup of this weekend, which will be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who will be going on the road to visit the Detroit Lions. These are two rosters that I think overachieved or even optimistic fans at the beginning of the season. And there's a lot of kind of stories of redemption and kind of, just kind of shifting the culture and expectations for not just the fan bases, but for honestly the cities, right? Detroit is very much a football city, and Tampa Bay has kind of been revived over the last couple of years. So I think this is just a fun matchup that has a lot of fun different storylines. Where do you want to start with this one?
So the main thing I want to talk about is I think Goff's redemption arc is greatly overstated because I don't think he ever, again, being traded, it was more of a contractual thing than anything. And again, McVay and him obviously just had some sort of disagreement because they just never seemed to see eye to eye. But what I do want to say is Jared Goff, I've always kind of been on his side because I do think he's in sort of that Kirk Cousins category where we act like he's so much worse than he actually is for some reason. And it just doesn't make much sense. But my hat is off to him still. He played a great game on Sunday. And with Baker, though, his really is to me way more of again, kind of a similar thing where I don't think it was necessarily Baker that I really doubted as much as, the Browns very similarly to the Rams. They just obviously did not like Baker. They shipped him off when he was playing through a torn labrum to try to help them. And then they were almost mad that he had worse results playing through an injury than if he wasn't injured. So I feel like both these guys more for me. I'm just glad that both of these teams are in the playoffs right now and the teams that traded them aren't. To me, that's what I love so much about this matchup.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you make, particularly about Goff and kind of just the lens that we've kind of viewed his career arc through, right? He's been to a Super Bowl before, right? And I think oftentimes the kind of dialogue around him can make it sound like he hasn't achieved anything. Just matchup wise, I think I'm going to lean towards taking the Lions in this spot. I just really like that A, they're going to be at home, and B, Goff and that O-line have just been incredible at home in a dome, kind of in, controlled playing conditions. For as good as Tampa Bay's been playing, I think the injuries to Baker are a little bit concerning. He's been playing with a ton of heart, and I really respect him. But I think some of that mobility's been a little compromised. You saw him take a couple really bad sacks in that game against the Eagles, and I think for as much as to me, I think this is the perfect matchup for the Lions in the sense that they're facing a team that's also coming off of a rather emotional and gutsy win for them. And I think the letdown factor will be kind of diminished a little bit. Obviously, when you see a team celebrate as much as the Lions celebrated winning a wild card weekend, you often expect in the next week that they're not going to be prepared and there can be a little bit of an emotional letdown from coming off such an emotional high. And I think that's mitigated a little bit just because they're matching up with the Bucs. But curious to see if you share that same perspective or if you see it differently.
To me, this is, again, like I said with the Lions, this is another matchup I'm having issues with. And again, I haven't had as much time. Usually I really make my decision on Friday night, for who I'm going to really put money on and who I'm going to believe in because, there are so many factors that go into this week. One, namely being injuries, especially for the Buccaneers. Baker played a great game, but he still is banged up and he took a lot of hits last week. So if he doesn't play a lot this week in practice, I could see that leaning heavily towards the Lions. But here's what I will say. The Buccaneers are one of the best run defenses in the league, with Vita Vea being the best probably run defender in the league. So going against a team that relies a lot on play action and successful running for their offense to hum, I think this game is really going to be on Jared Goff through and through. I think he's going to have to make plays. And remember those X factors I was talking about. Jahmyr Gibbs didn't really have any super explosive plays out of the backfield, and neither did Jamison Williams. I think that's what we're going to need to see against the Buccaneers team that led up to really big plays to the Eagles that kept them in that game. I think that's what we're going to need to see. If the Lions play like they did against the Rams and the Bucs play like they did against the Eagles, in my opinions, the Buccaneers probably would have edged that one out. So to me, a lot of this is going to depend on, I need to see the Lions mentality this week at practice. I want to see them in their media. I want to see them showing that they're dialed in. I don't want to see them answering 30 questions about what the win means. I want to see them when they get that question, the stereotypical what you want response. I want them to go, that doesn't matter now. That's awesome. We're on to next week though. We're on to Tampa. That's what I want to see out of them. So to me, I think I'll lean Bucks on this one just because, again, early. I'm not even sure if I'm necessarily going to bet Bucks. I might end up switching to Lions this week, but early impression to me, I'm going to lead Buccaneers. But this is in a world where the Lions are elated with their wins and Baker Mayfield is not very banged up. going into the week.
Yeah, and I would say I want to give Campbell credit. I think I'm a little hard on him at times. I think one thing he has done well for this Lions team is he has worn his emotions on his sleeve. But at the same time, if you really listening to a lot of the speeches he gives, he's also been very much of the, that's one win, that's one game. What's the bigger picture? And, I think if they stay true to kind of that message that they've had throughout the season, I think that would bode well for the Lions. I would also add on the Buccaneers side of things, there are still a lot of players on that roster that were part of that Tom Brady Super Bowl run, right? And so I think the experience will go a long way when you're looking at a Lions team that has a lot of players that haven't been in anything remotely close to, a divisional round game before. So I think that experience and kind of just the know-how and kind of the wisdom can play a role in that. I think the last thing that I want to just put here then, sorry.
Oh, no, I just want to say, and, we did actually get to see a matchup early on in the season of these two teams, but this was before the Buccaneers were kind of this team that they became late in the year where they really rallied behind Mayfield, as well as the emergence, of Rachaad White. Rachaad White at that point still was a big question mark. He didn't start having, those 100-yard games till late in the season. So just like I said with the Texans game, both of these teams have changed a lot since that point. So I think it's just going to be very interesting. Sam Laporta emerged for the Lions. So that's something that we didn't know at that point. Baker Mayfield's playing a lot better. They're leaning a lot more on Jameer and Montgomery than they were early in the year. So much has changed. I think that's going to be, again, the X factor. Mike Evans also, him and Baker Mayfield were struggling a little earlier in the year. Before end of the year, they've really gotten it together. So I think this game, once again, is going to come down to what team kind of knows their identity more and who executes better, right? Execution is the most important thing in sports. We talk about it way too much. And I mean, there's a reason though, you can have the perfect game plan, but it comes down to execution at the end of the day. Kyle Shanahan, when he was up 28-3, I don't think they were bad plays they were calling. I just don't think they were necessarily the right for that circumstance or executed correctly. So once again, execution. And I do kind of trust Campbell over Todd Bowles. So I give the coaching edge to Dan Campbell because Bowles is very quiet, more of a defensive guy. But again, will that swing in favor of the Buccaneers? If they can keep the Lions to 20 again, will the Buccaneers be able to score more? Who knows?
Yeah, I think whatever the case, we're going to be in for a very, very fun weekend of football. The last thing I wanted to add here is for anyone that thinks, wants to criticize Drake for kind of being on the fence for a lot of these matchups, I will say Drake's record this postseason calling the winner, not just the spread, but the outright winner of a lot of these games has been fantastic. And, I don't think, you'll share it publicly, but I think his DraftKings account has just been flying high. So that gives me a little bit of concern for some of my picks because Drake has not missed very often this postseason.
Yeah, and I think this postseason for me is just, I think we're finally getting removed from the COVID years where it really just was a lot harder these last few years, in my opinion, to kind of predict how things were going to go because so much change has happened to the league these last few years. And so now we finally have kind of settled into a groove. And I think so have I in terms of, how I watch games again and how, I can monitor things. We also had a lot of injuries this year. So, that has given me a lot of time to get a lot of eyes on different players. And as I've stated, I love the old Game Pass thing where you can watch a condensed version of a game. I will rewatch games multiple times. And so now, though, I just feel like a lot of these teams, whereas in the past with COVID and other things, there wasn't as much of an identity. It's mainly been quarterback injuries this year. And all of these teams in the playoffs right now, that hasn't been an issue for. So a lot of these teams have stayed pretty similar throughout the year. So I just think it's been a lot of, like I said, I find games where they play a comparable opponent, see how they play recently, see who's hot. And it helped me a lot this weekend. I went perfect on betting the spread or money line this week. I did not even, if I didn't pick the outright winner, I at least would cover on a spread. So I did just have a great week. And I think, again, that's just because there's consistency in these playoffs for the first time in the last few years.
A very humble way of saying you won a lot of money, but wouldn't expect anything different from a pretty humble guy. So I think with that, then that'll close out our show for today. We thank you guys for listening in on kind of this playoff weekend recap, as well as a divisional round preview. Hope you guys are sticking around. We've got a lot of great content coming out pretty soon. So we'll talk again soon. We'll see ya.